Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to All 24 News World News Program with me, Karim Zachary. These are your headlines. India swears in Draupadi Murmu as the second female president. Myanmar's ruling junta executes democracy activists, carrying out the first death sentences in decades. Polls open in Tunisia for a referendum on constitutional changes proposed by President Kais Saied. A ferocious wildfire in the U.S. spreads rapidly in the area of Cemetery National Park, forcing many to flee their homes. Hello again, those were today's top stories. First in our news, addressing the nation after being sworn in as the 15th President of India and the second female president, Draupadi Murmu, Monday stated that she was honored to take charge at a time India is completing 75 years of independence. She added that she was the first president to be sworn in independent India, calling Murmu's swearing-in ceremony a watershed moment for India, especially for the poor, marginalized and downtrodden. Prime Minister Narendra Modi wished the president luck for her tenure.
My journey in life began in a small tribe village in Odisha, in the environment where I grew up. Benefiting from a simple elementary education was like a dream for me, but despite many obstacles, my determination remained, and I became the first girl in my village to enter university.
Myanmar's military government has executed 4 prisoners anti-coup activists, among them a former legislator of a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Aung San Suu Kyi, drawing widespread condemnation and outrage. This is the first death sentence carried out in decades. The junta sentenced dozens of anti-coup activists to death as part of its crackdown on dissent after seizing power last year.
For them, committing these kind of crimes in judicial or out of judicial doesn't matter. The main thing is they want to hold the power. They want to prove who is in power. They want to instill fear among us, especially the resistant groups and the general public. So they will do everything they can.
This is a real wake-up call for the international community, that they cannot allow Myanmar to just slide off the table, to be concerned too much about other things and ignore Myanmar's worsening civil war and the human rights atrocities that are going along with it. This is a call for attention now for the international community to step back in and recognize that ASEAN doesn't have the wherewithal to solve this problem.
To neighboring Tunisia now, polls opened in Tunisia for the vote on the draft constitution, which some fear will make a return to autocracy. If approved, critics say the proposed changes will give President Kais Saied more power and reduce the role of the judiciary. It would also allow the president to control budgets. Many are expected to boycott the polls.
Our money and our wealth are enormous. And our will is even greater, to build a new Tunisia and new republic, which breaks with the past.
Thousands of Filipino protesters took to the streets of Manila on Monday ahead of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s first speech addressing the nation. Islam said.
Thousands of Filipino protesters took the streets of Manila on Monday ahead of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s first speech addressing the nation. The protests called for the new government to tackle main issues which the country had been struggling with, including unemployment growth, inflation, independent foreign policy, and justice for human rights victims under Marcos Jr.'s father. The latter had repeatedly been accused of jailing and even killing many of his opponents during his ruling period.
We are facing a very bad economic crisis. On top of that, you have efforts to revise history, distort history, and glorify the dictatorship of Marcos's father, Ferdinand Sr. We cannot allow these things to happen. That's why we are protesting. We are demanding that this regime address the urgent demands of the people and stop historical distortions, stop denying history, and take accountability for the crimes of the dictatorship. You have to control inflation. You have to increase wages. You have to address agriculture slump. You have to stop the new taxes. We have to fix the nation's debt. And we have to address the human rights crisis as well.
Marcos Jr., who won a landslide victory in May election, is expected to outline his new roadmap which might lead the country out of its social and economic turmoil.
Isa kasi syempre ang mga kabataan ngayon.
The youth are some of the most vocal when it comes to different issues. Given the current administration, we are the ones frequently blacklisted, as we are often called terrorists. There is a need for safe spaces for the youth, and we are also fighting for our academic freedom.
Isa kami sa laging natatawag ng mga terorista.
Around 20,000 police officers and anti-riot troops were deployed in the metropolitan Manila to secure the ceremony before a joint session of Congress at the House of Representatives. Marcos Jr., who known as Bongbong, is seen as one of the most challenged leaders in the country's recent history. He will serve until 2028 with his unavoidable vice president, Sara Duterte Carpio.
To the Russia-Ukraine file now. Ukraine has been pushing ahead with efforts to restart grain exports despite missile strikes on the biggest port on Saturday. Russia has admitted it launched the attack on Odessa and says it was trying to hit military targets. The attack has raised doubts over Russia's willingness to respect a crucial agreement to unblock Ukrainian port. Ukraine's president says forces were advancing towards the southern region of Kherson, which Russia occupied earlier. More in this report with Hossein Berkan.
As Russian forces captured more of the two provinces, which together make up Ukraine's industrial Donbas region, Ukrainian officials are planning a counter-offensive to retake Russian-occupied areas in the south. A Ukrainian army commander has said it would be impossible for Russia to take over Kharkiv. Amid speculations, Moscow may be planning to take the country's second-largest city.
They don't have enough forces to take the Kharkiv region, but our operative intelligence say that they will be trying to surround Kharkiv and the Kharkiv region.
Less than a day after Russia and Ukraine signed an agreement on resuming grain shipments from Odessa, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that any ships coming to Ukrainian ports to pick up additional grain would be inspected to make sure they don't bring any weapons. In turn, Russian Defense Ministry officials insisted that a strike on the port of Odessa had hit only military targets. In the Donbas regions, tens of thousands of people who evacuated from Ukraine's eastern Donetsk are returning to homes close to the front line because they can't afford to live in safe places. The office of the mayor of Pokrovsk estimated that 70% of those who evacuated have come home.
They gave us food. We had everything in the evacuation, but it was temporary. But then they told us to go to a nursing home. My son refused.
This comes as Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is on a tour to Africa in an attempt to reassure the continuation of Russian grain supplies amid uncertainty over a deal to resume Ukrainian exports from the Black Sea.
And when asked about the recent attack on Odessa and whether the peace is a long way off, Dr. Greg Simons, Associate Professor at Uppsala University from Sweden, answered All 24 News special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine war.
Ukraine has been having Trojan horses, as has been proven. They've been hiding military objects in shopping malls and all kinds of things. If you have a military object within a civilian port, it is a legitimate target during time of war. If that ship was a civilian ship, it's another matter. And these are the clear rules of war. This is a war, and it doesn't matter who's the aggressor and who's not the aggressor. this is how things are conducted. If we look back to the different wars the Americans have fought, they've been far less discriminate in terms of their bombings. We just need to look at what has happened in Iraq, for example, when purely civilian targets were leveled.
The head of Russian diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov, arrived Sunday evening in Oyo, in the north of Congo, where he began the second leg of his African tour, which began in Cairo in Egypt. President Sassou Nguesso and Minister Sergei Lavrov will hold face-to-face talks tonight. The Italian Coast Guard announced on Sunday that it has saved 700 illegal migrants, where 5 other bodies have been recovered off the country's seafront Mediterranean coast. Authorities indicated that the migrants had been relocated to the ports of Calabria and Sicily. It's worth noting that more than 34,000 migrants have arrived in Italy since the beginning of this year, compared to 25,000 last year, according to figures from the Italian Interior Ministry. In the Caribbean, at least 17 people, including an infant, have died off the coast of the Bahamas after a boat carrying refugees and migrants from Haiti capsized. 25 people were rescued, but it's reported that up to 60 may have been on board. Authorities say they are seeing an increase in Haitians desperate to flee poverty and gang violence. The Bahamas is on the route often taken by those going from Haiti to the United States. Prime Minister Philip Davis says that appears to be the case in this recent incident.
Rescue teams recovered 17 bodies from the water. 15 males, 1 male, and an infant. 25 persons were rescued and were turned over to health officials for monitoring. A multi-agency investigation is underway to determine the full circumstances surrounding a suspected human smuggling operation, which has resulted in the deaths of these irregular Haitian migrants.
Massive California wildfires forced the evacuation of 6,000 people while burning several thousand acres. 12,000 firefighters been deployed against the oak fire in Mariposa County. A state of emergency has now been declared. Sofian Kenturi with the story.
Due to the consequences of oak fire, which has burned homes, damaged key infrastructure, and required the evacuation of more than 3,000 inhabitants, Governor Gavin Newsom today declared a state of emergency for Mariposa County. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate remote mountain settlements on Sunday as a catastrophic wildfire near Yosemite National Park raged out of control through tinder dry forest and grew into one of California's worst fire of the year.
This is our home. I feel like we're going to do what we can to at least have a chance.
According to California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, or CAL FIRE, some 2,000 firefighters, as well as planes and bulldozers, fought the oak fire under challenging circumstances that included steep terrain, scorching temperatures, and little humidity.
I had just enough time to get birth certificates, my DD-214, the picture of my parents.
The fire started on Friday in Mariposa County, southwest of the park and close to the community of Mid-Pins. On Saturday, when flames ripped through vegetation that had been severely dried up by the worst drought in decades, officials described explosive fire behavior.
Parts of Europe continue to experience unusually high temperatures. In Greece, temperatures are forecast at 42 degrees Celsius in the coming days. The country is in the grip of a heat wave that's expected to last 10 days, but that hasn't stopped tourists from flocking into the country's capital, Athens. Emergency crews are battling 3 major forest fires in southern Greece. Flash flooding across Yemen has left at least 8 people dead. Torrential rain caused the house to collapse in the capital Sana'a, killing 2 children, and a car was swept away in the southern western province of Damar, killing all 6 passengers. The annual rainy season in Yemen usually runs until August. The head of the Roman Catholic Church has landed in Canada to apologize in person for the role the church played in running presidential or residential schools for Indigenous children. Pope Francis is in the city of Edmonton for what he's calling his pilgrimage of penance. More than 150,000 children were forcibly removed from their homes and sent to schools where many faced abuse.
I believe that's one of the reasons he's here, is because our people were, well, a lot of stuff was taken away from us, and we were put into schools. Like, I know my father was put into residential schools, so was my mother.
I'm just so happy that he's here. I want to feel his presence. I haven't been in the Vatican, but I'm so glad that, you know, he's here in Edmonton, and the feeling that he is like so close, he's so close to us, it's just like overwhelming for me.
President Jair Bolsonaro has launched his re-election campaign, but he faces an uphill battle. He's trailing in the polls behind the main rival leftist, his former president Lula da Silva. Jair Bolsonaro is criticized for his handling of the coronavirus outbreak, which saw Brazil have the second highest death toll.
At this event to launch my re-election, I don't need to tell you what I will do. If I'm re-elected, democratically and transparently, I call on everyone to take on the street on September 7th. Take to the street for the last time. Let's take the streets for the last time.
As the Allies intensify military training amid concerns with North Korea, the U.S. Army on Monday published video of its Apache attack helicopter performing live fire operations in South Korea for the first time since 2019. The drills come as South Korea and the United States announce they will resume other live field training during the joint military exercises, which had been scaled back for several years due to COVID-19 and efforts to lower tensions with the North. People were ordered to stay indoors in parts of Taiwan, including its capital, Taipei, on Monday during an air raid exercise as the island steps up preparations for the event of a Chinese attack. Sirens sounded at 1:30 p.m. for the mandatory street evacuation drills, which effectively shut towns and cities across northern Taiwan for 30 minutes. Authorities in Ethiopia's southeastern Somali region said they killed more than 100 shabab fighters during a failed incursion by the group from neighboring Somalia. Shabab fighters were killed earlier this week during a security operation led by the region's special police forces, which lasted 3 days. The Iraqi police announced the killing of 3 gunmen and wounding of 3 others in a clash with security forces in the north of the country. The police reported that the security forces clashed with ISIS elements with launchers and managed to kill 3 gunmen and wound 3 others. Due to the global food crisis caused by the war in Ukraine, many local small producers have become the center of attention of many governments, such as the one in Egypt, to help alleviate the pressure. Similarly, the rise in prices of raw material in countries such as Philippines is taking a toll on the purchasing power of citizens in basic commodities such as bread. More details in this report.
These small farms, which are concentrated in the northern Nile Delta, are even the principal producers of internal demand because major operations are mostly focused on export. For instance, 60% of wheat consumed in Egypt is imported, almost entirely from Russia and Ukraine, two markets that have been severely impacted by the conflict, but for the rest, there are local small producers.
The agricultural sector covers almost 8 million hectares. However, when we look at the number of farmers in this industry, we find that between 80 and 90% of them are small farmers with a total of 10 to 20 hectares each. The majority of Egypt's agricultural land is planted by small farmers, who also provide the majority of the country's food production and consume 80% of the country's water.
They are a crucial supply chain for feeding Egypt's 103 million people, yet they are being forced to sell at a loss. The country's only defense against the conflict in Ukraine is the small agricultural operators, who are being driven out of business.
We need farmers. Egypt is facing a problem as it deals with issues relating to food security, consumer behavior, water scarcity, employment, and financial inclusion, among other things. Working with the small farmers is the answer to all of these issues.
In Philippines, the pandesal is the main breakfast. It's a somewhat sweet food that is dipped in coffee or baked with cheese. But when the price of wheat rises and the peso weakens, making imported oil expensive, many bakeries are forced to reduce their production of it. The pandesal, often known as the pain of the poor, at the bakery Matimias in the Manil suburbs, had previously weighed 35 grams. It now weighs 25 grams, the only way that Jim Molion, the establishment's co-operator, initially discovered to prevent an increase, risk losing consumers to a competitor 5 parties further away with his price of 2.5 pesos per unit.
Our worry is if we raise the price, they won't buy our bread, because we know that Filipinos will find ways to save money.
As a result of the suspension of Ukraine exports following outbreak of the conflict, the Food and Agriculture Organization's Food Price Index, which analyzes the international prices of the most widely traded food supplies, reached its highest position in March since records began in 1990.
Well, that's all we have for now. But here's a reminder of our top stories. India swears in Draupadi Murmu as the second female president. Myanmar's ruling junta executes democracy activists, carrying out the first death sentences in decades. Polls open in Tunisia for referendum on constitutional changes proposed by President Kais Saied. You also watched in our news, a ferocious wildfire in the US spreads rapidly in the area of Cemetery National Park, forcing many to flee their homes. Well, that's the end of our program. Thank you for keeping it here on All 24 News. More news, follow us on social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Bye for now.